There are 6,000 languages in the world, but all we speak are facts. Hey, what's up, you guys? Welcome back to yet another episode of Zillennial Money. And I believe we're on episode 23 now. So, time flies when you're having fun. So for those, our audience members who might be new, my name is Andy, the world's greatest podcast host. And with me here, I have two other guys who will introduce themselves for audience members who might be new. So take it away, guys.
Hey, hello everyone. What's up? So this is Dominic here. Please be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe to this channel as well as our Clips channel and our personal channels. So let's get started.
Hey guys, Tristan here. We've got a pretty good docket for you today, so I'll send it back to Andy to take it away.
Alrighty, so we got a jam-packed docket as always. So let's jump into our first story. And you guys know the drill by now. For repeat viewers of this show, we always like to start off with some Bitcoin mining news because that's always popular. And the big news this week for Bitcoin miners is Cleanspark. So Cleanspark has announced a new hash rate expansion plan. So they're spending $25.8 million, so almost $26 million, to acquire 5 new sites in Georgia. This is Georgia, the state, not the country. So to acquire 5 new sites in Georgia for a total of 60 megawatt hours of more capacity, which will add 3.7 exahash once this is all up and running. So here's the press release. I'm not going to read all of it because it's basically the exact same as what I've just said. So that's story part 1. And I guess for Cleanspark, this is full disclosure. This is a stock that I am personally invested in, along with some other miners like Bitfarms and Iron. And actually, there's been a new buy for me as well, and I think for Tristan as well. So before I toss it back to you guys on this Cleanspark story, why don't I also tell you guys about part 2, which is the Hive bet, or our new bet on Hive Technologies or Hive Mining, I think, whatever their like full name is, but they're another Bitcoin miner. So part 2 of this story is that we've added Hive, or I've added Hive to my account, and I think Tristan, you did as well, right? So maybe while you're at it, go through a little bit of your bullish thesis on why you decided to add Hive. So yeah, just those 2 pieces of stories. So let me toss it to, I guess, Tristan first, since I mentioned you multiple times already. So Sparks news, and then why did you buy Hive?
Yep. So with regards to Cleanspark's news, I would say that this is a good sign. They are acquiring more land. They're acquiring more energy, and they already, from my understanding, they already have the machines to kit this out pretty well already. So that means that this will be pretty turnkey, and they'll have this added to their operations relatively quickly. So I think that that's a good sign from Cleanspark. Definitely a nice boost. And as mentioned before, I am invested in Cleanspark as well, as Andy is, and so just to have that disclosed as well. None of this is financial advice, so just saying. But yeah, so it looks like it's generally a pretty good sign that they're expanding and having some additional purchasing of land and getting that additional power. And so moving on to the Hive piece. So Hive is an interesting situation because currently right now I would say that they're probably one of, if not the most undervalued miner currently. And I think that from what I'm seeing with regards to Hive's performance is that they're very efficient. So they're producing a lot of Bitcoin for the amount of exahash they actually have. And so that's always a good sign. And they have a quite large HODL as well, which is currently approximately 50% ish of their market cap. At least when I checked a couple days ago, the stock price has increased, so it might be a little bit lower percentage wise, but they do have a substantial hodl. So the bullish thesis from my perspective with Hive, and again, this is not financial advice. This is just kind of what I'm thinking and why I decided to purchase the stock. With Hive, their current evaluation is what is really the big the big interest factor with them, because with regards to a lot of the other large Bitcoin miners, so for example, like Iris, Cleanspark, etc., the large good ones, most of them have already had a pretty big run up. So it gets a little bit harder to buy a huge amount and expect a larger return, because they've already had a lot of that return happen. So it's easier for Hive to go like do a 3x than for Cleanspark to do a 2x, right? And so with regards to Hive being pretty well situated, like their big downside that I see is that they don't have a lot of growth planned. They are growing, but not nearly at the rate that something like the Bit Farms, Iris, they're all growing at like multiples of their overall business. So, with Bit Farms moving from 6 to 21 exahash, representing like a massive increase in terms of their total exahash, and then Iris doing the same thing basically with an even higher amount, going all the way to 30 exahash. So Hive is definitely more of like a value play, I would say, than kind of betting on growth, which is kind of what my thought process was with like Bit Farms and the Iris Energy, which are also stocks that I have invested in. So Hive in that regard is kind of, it's really cheap right now, and I think that's really one of the big factors for me, is that it's cheap. It has a lot of potential. There is a possibility that they will issue further details on additional growth, but even if they don't, they're currently pretty well valued. So if Bitcoin goes up substantially, they've got a lot more room to run before they're kind of in that fair value range even that some of these other Bitcoin miners are. So for example, like in my mind currently, like Iris Energy is risen so much that it's like at the fair value that it would be going into a bull run. So before the bull run, whereas Hive is kind of still sitting in that spot of undervalued for pre-bull run. So there's kind of a space here where we can kind of get a good price on Hive, and even if it doesn't go quite as high multiple wise as some of the other Bitcoin miners with more growth, I think that you can get a lot of value compared to like taking that same money and putting it into like Iris Energy, for example, where you'll get more. You may get a larger. You may get a large return, but proportionally, if you didn't buy like a few months ago, or even a month ago, honestly, in May, you've missed out on a decent amount of growth already, which means that it's going to be harder for you to get quite the same multiple. And so Hive is kind of in that sweet spot of cheap enough that you may still be able to get a reasonably large multiple, but not so cheap that we're worried about the death of the company or something to that effect. And a big factor on that front is that they do have a very good balance sheet, similar to a lot of the other miners. That's one thing where Bitcoin miners all seem to be, or not all, but a lot of them are relatively all right for. A lot of them have relatively good balance sheets, which does mean that the valuation of the company is more important, and the growth projections. So that's kind of where the thesis for Hive is coming from, at least from my perspective. Maybe I'll toss it back to Andy for maybe his thoughts on Hive.
And maybe I'll go a little bit later. I actually want to get Dom your opinion on this, because I know maybe you're a little bit less experienced than me and Tristan in terms of investing in these Bitcoin miners. So given what you just heard Tristan say, Would you be interested in potentially buying more Bitcoin miners or Hive specifically, or what do you think of like the Cleanspark news or just any of the stuff that we talked about? Your opinion first, and then I'll go.
Oh yeah, sure, no worries. So I think it's really cool how CleanSpark's like expanding. I think it's really good for the company and then ultimately like good for them. But I guess in hindsight, I also do agree with like Tristan. I know you guys are already in CleanSpark, but for me, I think based on the price of CleanSpark as of today, especially in the USD like NY New York Stock Exchange market, I don't think it's best for me to get in necessarily now with CleanSpark. I think I've gone way past points of where I could get any potential gains. So for that, I might pass on CleanSpark specifically. Um, on the other hand, I do think Hive is pretty promising, especially with like what Tristan was just saying about like a good balance sheet, etc. That's music to my ears. And I'm actually in Hive. Like I have like a little bits that I've recently bought over like the past few days, and I totally agree with you guys. I think this is the next best bet. It's like, for example, if I were to buy CleanSpark, the expansion on like my money's worth wouldn't be as much as if I, took a chance on Hive. And I think the money would grow probably like twice as much if I just went through the Hive direction. And on top of that too as well, it's on the TSX, which is quite nice. So I don't have to worry about converting to US currency and can keep everything in Canadian, which is quite nice. It's on the US and Canadian stock exchanges, which is neat. So I think for now I'll keep buying Hive whenever it's on the down and hope for the best and see if it rises more. So yeah.
I just got to push back a little on what you said about CleanSpark, right? Like, I don't agree that there's no more like upside, right? I think Tristan would agree with this. I think what Tristan meant was like, you'll still make money, but you'll have to wait until like Bitcoin makes its bull run and then you make money because Bitcoin is going up, versus with, companies like Hive and Bitfarms. If you look at their relative values for what the hash rate is that they're putting out, like you can make an argument that is feasibly it should be higher given Bitcoin's price right now, right? Or given the current hash rate versus the Bitcoin price right now. So Bitcoin is at around 65,000 US dollars. And I don't know what the total like hash rate of the market is, but like, given these metrics at the current moment, you could argue that Hive and Bitfarm should be worth more and CleanSpark might be closer to the fairly valued mark, but you're still going to make like tons of money, hopefully. Not financial advice, right? But the thesis is that you're still going to make tons of money once Bitcoin begins its bull run. So I think that's just a point of clarification that I wanted to make. And in terms of my opinion on Hive, I think Tristan, you already put it pretty nicely. So it's just basically the same points that I was going to make. So I won't repeat every single thing. But basically, to summarize, it's just, yeah, like if you look at the HODL position, it's like 55% of the entire company's market cap is just Bitcoin on Hive's balance sheet. And the other 45% or so, if you look at the hash rate that they're putting out, their efficiency, and the Bitcoin that they're able to get per exahash, it's Hive is among like the top, right? I think like top 3 or top 5 at least, but it might be top 3. So it's an incredibly efficient miner. I just think that it's undervalued for what it is, right? Given that they don't have a lot of growth, that's true. But I see Hive, like maybe this is a comment that's new that Tristan didn't mention, but I see Hive as a play on what Hut 8 could have been, right? It's like an image of what Hut 8 could have been. So if you guys don't know the kind of backstory or the lore, Hut 8 is also a Canadian Bitcoin miner. And then they did this deal with this company called USBTC where they merged. It was a merger of equals. But upon further evaluation, once the details of the deal was disclosed, I was a Hut 8 shareholder at the time. And I didn't like the deal, right? So I decided to sell out of my position in Hut 8 completely just because I didn't like the deal. So USBTC was a struggling company. They had a lot of debt. And I believe they would have gone bankrupt eventually if they didn't do this merger deal with Hut 8. So once they did this merger deal, I was like actually willing to give Hut 8 another chance and let them like kind of move on from this. But then all of a sudden, with like no warning, they're like, oh, the like old Hut 8 CEO is out, and then the person who was like one of the co-founders of USBTC is now the new CEO. So like, this change of management was kind of the last straw that broke the camel's back. So I decided to sell out of all my Hut 8 shares. And Hut 8, they had a lot of HODL, right? Like they're a large proportion of their balance sheet is Bitcoin. And I think that that's actually still the case. But the issue was that they weren't like, because they were doing this deal, they were like, oh, we can't invest in like infrastructure growth and growth in hash rate because we're doing this deal. I'm like, okay, fine. And then after the deal finished, they're still not investing in expanding their hash rate. Instead, the CEO published this article. He gave like a interview or something. The new CEO, the one that came from USBTC, who is now the CEO of this merge company, and he's like, oh yeah, we're not gonna focus on Bitcoin mining anymore. It's gonna be more of an AI high performance computing company. And it's like, I don't mind a Bitcoin miner doing high performance computing. I know Iron does that, and I'm a shareholder in Iron as well. But to not announce any hash rate expansion, like Iron is announcing massive hash rate expansion, right? So they're not doing the HPC stuff at the cost of hash rate expansion. They're doing both, right? Like, ¿por qué no las dos? Like, why not both? So like they're doing both, and then Hut 8 is like, oh, we're gonna completely abandon the Bitcoin mining thing. We're not gonna. Their machines are also very old. If you look at like the Hut 8 machines, right? So their efficiency is going down, and they're not investing in that area of the business, and they're completely pivoting. So I was just like, I'm out, right? And it's just kind of like an unfortunate thing that happened with Hut 8. And I think that Hive is like an image of like what Hut 8 could have been, as I said, right? Where sure, like Hive doesn't have a lot of hash rate growth either, and they have a large HODL, but at least they're very efficient. So they got relatively new machines, and they're able to focus on mining Bitcoin, right? And I think they used to also mine Ethereum back when it was proof of work. And to be honest, I didn't like the way that they did the transition when Ethereum went off proof of work. I think they kind of like mishandled that a bit because like they kind of just fell off in terms of like hash rate and profitability and all that stuff when Ethereum went off of proof of work. But I'm willing to give Hive another chance, given that their efficiency is still good and their HODL is still good, and they're performing well for the hash rate that they're giving out. So I just kind of wanted to give like a tale of two cities there between Hut 8 and Hive. And yeah, I think it was a huge missed opportunity for Hut 8, and Hive can maybe succeed where they failed. But yeah, anyways, don't get mad at me if you're a Hut 8 shareholder, right? I don't wish for Hut 8 to fail, right? I wish they succeed with their high performance computing stuff. It's not my cup of tea right now. So, for that reason, I'm out, kind of like Shark Tank. But yeah, anyways, there is like one last part to this story that I wanted to go over, which is the performance of Bitcoin miners versus Bitcoin. So if you guys recall, I think it was March or April, back when like MicroStrategy and Bitcoin were just going up day after day, and the miners were flat or down, right? Everyone's complaining, right? And it's like, oh, the miners are trash. Why am I in miners? I just sell everything and buy Bitcoin ETFs or buy MicroStrategy. Well, now it's the opposite, right? Now miners are going up every day, and Bitcoin is going nowhere, right? Bitcoin is flat, and so is MicroStrategy. And I don't hear anybody complaining, right? Maybe there are some who like, panic sold the miners back in March and April. They're the ones complaining. But yeah, I don't see nearly as much complaining anymore. So I kind of wanted to maybe toss the question to you guys. Why do you guys think this is the case, that like this trend has completely flipped? And yeah, just, or maybe if I, cut you off on the previous story, you can also go back if there's anything you want to add on the previous stories about Hive and Cleanspark. But just an open field. Take it away, guys.
Yeah, so I just before I touch on that, I do want to comment on your tale of two cities with Hut and Hive, and just say that basically all of Hut's market cap is its hodl. But if we take out hodl, so minus the hodl from their market cap, Hive is roughly half the value of Hut for its non-hodl portion. And Hive's performance and exahash is more than half of Hut. So right there, you know, there's clearly Hut is being valued higher, even though Hut has basically much less to offer. They've got worse machines, worse efficiency, and they've got not even that much more exahash. If I recall correctly, they have 6.5 exahash. Hive is, I believe, hit 5.5. So with that in mind, Hive is basically as large or almost as large as Hut in terms of its mining. And then in addition, they have a much lower valuation and they're way more efficient. So it's like, you know, if Hut had done basically anything to to figure out the situation, they could have easily been one of the top miners, but instead they've kind of just, sat around and done a whole heck of a lot of nothing. And, even if Hive hasn't been growing its exahash, from what I can tell, they've been increasing the efficiency pretty diligently. So they have been replacing old machines as they go. So even if their exahash is not doing like a 3x like a Bitfarms, for example, their efficiency is continually staying high or moving below or moving down. So I think that's kind of a good comparison between the two.
And also, actually, you just reminded me of one point. Sorry to cut you off, but today is June 20th that we're recording this episode on, and HUD 8 has still not put out their May update. So just a question to butt in. Do you think that this is a red flag, Tristan?
I would not be happy if I was still a HUD shareholder. I would be pretty displeased with that because Bitfarms releases theirs on June 1st, if I'm not mistaken, like the first business day following the following month. You're telling me you guys can't produce a report, within 20 days? I think it's just sounds like a red flag, or alternatively, they're shutting down, they're whirling out of the Bitcoin mining space. And maybe that's just what is going on, is just that they're trying to get out of the space gradually and move into that AI area. Either way, I would not be happy if I were a HUT 8 shareholder, particularly since I would be buying it with the perspective that it is a Bitcoin miner. I would not be buying it as an AI play specifically. Like I think that, and I think with regards to the AI kind of plays, there's a lot of people in the space and it's a very new space. So I don't think that I would risk it to buy a AI company like on its own, right? Like I think that having that revenue as an additional piece to Bitcoin mining is like perfectly fine to help with the crypto winters. But again, for that, I would not be buying Iris Energy if all Iris Energy did was AI stuff. And if Hut is heading down that path, Hut will be disappearing from my mind as an investment opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of already disappeared for me, at least. It's like you're dead to me already. Anyways, Dom, do you have anything you want to add to this story? What do you think of HUD, and how do you think of this tale of two cities between Hive and HUD?
Oh no, I mean, from what I'm hearing, I totally agree with you guys too as well. I think, all in all, I think HUD 8 has gone off the beaten path, and they're not like what they necessarily used to be, and their acquisitions and etc. are a little funky. So like, I think overall for that, I would also out as well. I don't think this is something I want to invest in necessarily, and I'm okay with like Hive for now and Bitfarms as like plays necessarily. So I think I agree with you guys too.
Oh yeah, I also just wanted to say one thing, because I remember from what Tom was saying with regards to Cleanspark. Like I think that Cleanspark will do well from here, because I think that it's got a lot of respect as a large cap miner now. So I think that there is room for Cleanspark to do some multiples. I just don't think that I don't think there's as much room as like Hive, for example. Like I wouldn't be surprised if I turned around and Cleanspark had hit like $80 USD. I wouldn't be that surprised. I'd be like, nice. But like I wouldn't be that surprised. Whereas if Hive were to hit like much higher numbers, right? Like even 40 Canadian dollars, I wouldn't be like, wow, this is so surprising to me, right? I would be more I wouldn't necessarily say I would be expecting it, but I'd be like, this is less of a jump, right? Because for Cleanspark to hit $80, an additional like $15 billion need to be cooked into the Bitcoin miner pot. Whereas for Hive to hit $40, only about $4.5 billion would need to come into the pot. Honestly, that's a substantially lower amount of money. So, and Cleanspark already had that big run up where it basically did a 4x, and it's basically sat there since then. So, a lot of these other miners have had their growth happen already. And I think that kind of will bring me back to what Andy was asking, which is why the Bitcoin miners were kind of going down in March and are now catching up and outperforming Bitcoin right now. And I think that there's two big reasons for that. So I think that basically what happened in March was everyone had a lot of FUD and fear with the halving. So when the halving was coming up and the halving was occurring, everyone was scared about miners because they're about to lose 50% of their revenue, right? So everyone was afraid to be in miners. Why be in miners when you could be in Bitcoin? So a lot of money that was in miners would have moved to Bitcoin just in general, because it is an alternative investment to the miners, And then after the halving, I think that that's when, and not immediately after the halving, but like after the halving, Bitcoin didn't move as much because the halving doesn't actually do as much to Bitcoin comparatively, because it just reduces the amount of supply that's being created, which doesn't have an immediate effect because it's not like we're necessarily using every single Bitcoin immediately upon its creation. It's not like there's always an immediate buy order, right? So like exchanges, for example, will have a substantial amount of Bitcoin that they will be trading between the different people, right? Before they have to buy additional Bitcoin on the open market to, supply to the people who are buying on their platform. So in that regard, the Bitcoin itself didn't have as much room to run around because there wasn't anything fundamentally changing with Bitcoin at that time. It's a lagged effect. It takes time for that supply deficit to kick in. That's caused by the reduction in the mining output. And so from that perspective, the miners, they kind of had, I think, the revelation. I think investors kind of had the revelation of, oh, the sky hasn't actually fallen on the miners. They haven't gone bankrupt. They're still mining a decent amount of Bitcoin. They're still doing relatively well. And most of them are still profitable, at least the larger efficient ones. And so, okay, maybe I should buy the miners instead of Bitcoin itself. And Bitcoin, because it's not going up as much anymore, now is more of the stagnant item. And so I think we basically saw a situation where Bitcoin rose, nothing crazy there, but the miners fell, but they fell past their fair value. And in my perspective, maybe I have their fair value a little higher than other people, but either way, they fell beyond the point of where they would be fairly valued. And that was kind of what happened in the March region, where they were cheaper, or maybe not March, maybe more like April, May, where they were cheaper. And then a lot of them have seen a large growth. And that's a result of, I think, people realizing that there is a lot of potential in these Bitcoin miners. And there's an arbitrage opportunity where the value of the Bitcoin miner is currently under the value that it should be for a fair assessment. In which case, if you buy here, you will now get this amount of space that you've gained, right? So, for example, with Iris, if you bought at $5 and now it's gone up to $13 or whatever it is now, you would have gained 160%, 150% from doing that. And that is not a movement of Iris becoming worth like 1.5 times, or no, sorry, like a 2.5x. It's more so that Iris was not worth as little as this, but it is worth the higher band. So it moved up to where it was supposed to be. So if you could see that it was undervalued from where it was supposed to be, you could take that kind of opportunity gain. And I think that that's kind of what happened, was that a lot of people were investing into it. And then when more of the larger market clued in, we now have this scenario where the people are looking forward at all this growth that the miners are projecting, and realizing that there's a lot of potential here. And then they're investing in them with a forward focus, as well as bringing that value up to where the miners should be actually valued at. So I think that's kind of what I'm thinking. And it's kind of like it's a bit of a unique scenario, because most things don't have like this halving thing where it affects one side of the asset area, but doesn't affect the other side. So it affected the miners and not the Bitcoin itself immediately. So it's a bit of a weird scenario.
Yeah, I mean, not financial advice, but if you're not paying attention to this Bitcoin mining space, then I think you're missing out, because literally we were just talking about Cleanspark and we're just casually tossing out like a $75 or $80 price target, which I think is very realistic if you actually look into like what it can achieve, like considering what Bitcoin is expected to do in this bull run. And if you look at like, $75, $80 price target, that's like 4 or 5x where the price of the stock is now, right? So like a 4 to 5x is like tame compared to in IR standard, because like we're looking at other miners that are in our opinion undervalued, that could potentially do more than that. So again, like I could be wrong, right? A lot of this could not work out maybe, but I think it will. And I think that this Bitcoin mining space is going to make a lot of people rich, including us who are shareholders. And yeah, Tristan, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say that, I think that some people might be looking at the number of multiples we're giving and be like, that's crazy. But I think that we also have to remember that a lot of these companies that we're referring to, like Bitfarms and Iron, for example, they are multiplying the size of their business by like multiple times, right? So if Bitfarms goes from a 6x exahash to a 21 exahash, that is like a 300%. That's a huge increase in their profitability and their everything, and the amount of money they're making. This is a substantial increase in that on that front. So not even taking into account like if Bitcoin stays at its current price, you should see a substantial return from that growth in the company itself. Like the company is getting larger, they're getting more revenue. They should, by definition, increase in value. And this is not financial advice. This is just kind of what I'm thinking. So like the multiples are not as crazy to me as they might sound at a glance. And again, we haven't had Bitcoin move at all, so it's basically been stagnant at like the 60 to 72-ish $1,000 USD mark. So if it starts running, it'll be a different scenario. So
yeah, and you know, I explained this in a previous episode. So you know, excuse me for being a broken record, but we did have a lot of new subscribers join the channel, so people might not have heard this. Let me just go through very quickly why the Bitcoin mining play is kind of like a leverage play on Bitcoin. Like, where does the leverage come from, right? So if you think about how Bitcoin mining actually works, is like you're expending a lot of electricity in order to get Bitcoin. However, oftentimes when Bitcoin goes on these, you know, big bull runs, the price of the Bitcoin goes up a lot faster than the electricity cost that you're spending to acquire each additional Bitcoin, right? So for example, if you're a Bitcoin miner and you're spending $40,000 of electricity to mine one Bitcoin, right? Like your per Bitcoin cost is $40,000. Well, Bitcoin's at $65,000 right now, and you know, let's say if it goes on a bull run and it hits 100K, right? It goes to 100K. Well, your like that move from 65K to 100K is, you know, it's almost like, you know, a double, right? By that point, your electricity costs would not have gone up that much, right? Because the electricity costs, they're just fixed, right? Because you're getting it from the power station. You have fixed term contracts, and they're not allowed to like overcharge you, right? So your electricity costs will still probably be around 40,000, like per Bitcoin, assuming that it's not exactly, because the hash rate is going to go up and you might need to expend more electricity, but it's not going to go up that fast, that much, right? So let's say you're spending, I don't know, by that point you're spending $50,000 per Bitcoin to mine each Bitcoin, and then you can sell it immediately for 100,000, right? So that's why, like, the difference between your electricity costs going up and the difference and the like price of the Bitcoin going up, like that gap is going to widen, right? And meaning that the price is going to go up a lot faster on the Bitcoin than the price for the electricity that you're paying, which means that that's where the leverage come from. Like that's why you're if you're mining Bitcoin and you're one of the more efficient ones, and your, like, you know, operating costs are controlled and they're low, then you can get like wildly profitable just for whenever Bitcoin runs, right? It's that leverage effect. So in effect, you're like buying Bitcoin, right? You're not really buying it, you're mining it, but it's kind of like you're buying Bitcoin for, let's say, $50,000 per Bitcoin using the electricity, right? You're paying for the electricity and you're buying it for 50,000. When the market price is already at 100,000, and by that point, like, or at any point, like being the Bitcoin miner, you're the only one that's able to do this. If you're a miner, right? Anyone else, let's say MicroStrategy or anyone else, they want to buy more Bitcoin, they have to go to the market and buy it at whatever the current market price is. But you, as the miner, you can buy it at the cost of electricity. And so that's kind of where the leverage effect comes from. That's why whenever Bitcoin runs, you know, it's commonly accepted that mining stocks will run like at least another 2x on top of that, right? So if we're thinking about Bitcoin doing a potential, I don't know, like 5-6x, something like that, this cycle, right? This entire cycle, meaning from now till the blow off top, which, if we're looking at the schedule, like it might occur sometime late 2025, right? So not this year, but next year, right? And if Bitcoin does that, then potentially Bitcoin miners could do 2x that. So if we're talking 5 to 6x on Bitcoin, we're talking maybe 10 to 12x on the miners, right? So, you know, I know it seems like, again, as Tristan said, it seems like we're just tossing out numbers that are just insane and crazy, but I genuinely think that there's like a very good chance that this could happen. And again, if you're not paying attention to this space, I think you're missing out. Dom, you haven't spoken in a while. Why don't you provide some comments to what we just said? Do you agree? Do you disagree? What do you think in general?
No, I totally agree. I think all in all, what I took out of what everyone was saying necessarily was, I think people are just searching for opportunity. I think I agree with Tristan. Like Bitcoin has been like pretty stagnant for like a little bit now. So people are looking elsewhere for like, relatable opportunities. And then miners is definitely that space where that opportunity can be filled for many people. And lately it's been fruitful for us. So it's like really nice and stuff. And um, for now, I'll be holding on a bit longer than I would have really, originally anticipated. But yeah, that's these are my thoughts. So yeah.
One more thing. I just want to say that I know that we're talking real bullish on the Bitcoin miners, and I just want to just put this out there that anyone who's considering investing in this kind of asset where there's a lot of volatility, you need to go into this with the understanding that there will be a lot of volatility. So I think that if people are looking to invest in any of these, you have to go in with a plan, and you can't just expect to get a 2x or a 3x tomorrow, right? And so I think that it's just important to emphasize that there is that it's not for the faint of heart is really what I'm trying to get at. If it's not if you're just trying to, if this is your first stock to buy, maybe start with something a little bit tamer to see how your ability to handle a loss or a gain affects you. Not that I think that anyone should or shouldn't invest in any of these stocks. Again, none of this is financial advice. I'm just trying to encourage people to consider carefully before they invest in some of these more volatile asset classes, because again, if you can't handle the amount of volatility, like you see your account drop a substantial amount in a day and you're just going to sell it, then you're going to lose in this scenario, right? You're going to have lost money by selling, obviously by cutting your losses, and maybe you wouldn't have if you'd held, or maybe you would have. Again, we can't see the future on these stocks. We can only provide the analysis and the assessments that we've done and kind of the conclusions we've come to, but obviously we could be wrong. So I just kind of wanted to get that out there, because I know I'm pretty bullish on them, but again, I feel like I need to emphasize that it's not for the faint of heart. When we were looking at our accounts in March, no one was happy. So
there are 6,000 languages in the world, but all we speak are facts. So that's the quote of the day. Yep, that's definitely true, and great word of warning, Tristan. So next story, let's move on to the next one. So the next story is talking about things that go up exponentially. NVDA. NVIDIA has become the world's most valuable company. So they beat out Apple, Microsoft. Microsoft is number 2. Apple's number 3 now. Alphabet, which is Google, is number 4. I think like Saudi Aramco is the world's largest oil company that's state-owned by the Saudi government, is somewhere up there as well. But, they're no match. They can't light a candle next to NVIDIA. So NVIDIA's market cap hit $3.3 trillion. And it looks like it's not stopping, right? So I think today it like briefly touched $140 per share. And it's looking like it's going to go to 150 very soon. So this is kind of like a move that has shocked even the most bullish people on NVIDIA, I would say, right? At this point, I don't know like who's still holding NVIDIA that hasn't taken profits, but apparently there's a lot of people out there that's holding NVIDIA still, which has some people concerned, right? And I'm not trying to like rain on your parade or anything, but here's another fact, right? So if you guys look at the next picture, is that back in 2000, in March, Cisco was another company that ran up hugely, right? So a lot of people might not even know what Cisco is. So Cisco is the one that makes Cisco WebEx, which sucks, by the way, right? If you've ever used WebEx. And I think like one of the like German military commanders was using WebEx to like host like a top secret meeting, and they got hacked by the Russians and all the info got leaked or something, right? So like, yeah, I don't know if it's Cisco's fault or if somebody just like didn't set the settings properly. But anyways, Cisco, they make communications equipment. They make like, landline telephones and like software that goes along with it, and like, just video conferencing and stuff like that, right? Which might not sound nearly as exciting as NVIDIA, but let me tell you that Cisco they did briefly surpass Microsoft as the most valuable firm back in year 2000. So this was during the .com bubble, and we all know what happened in year 2000, right? Like the .com bubble eventually burst, and then Cisco came crashing down among other companies as well, among other tech companies, and then. Cisco has never gone back to its previous highs back in year 2000. So it's languished since then. And right now, at least Cisco is probably not even in the world's top 100 most valuable companies, right? They're still a big company, but they're nowhere near their former glory is what I'm trying to say, right? So this kind of like, it's eerily similar to NVIDIA. And I know that people will take issue with that statement because they're like, NVIDIA is totally different. Cisco's boring. They make communications devices and like telephones and stuff. NVIDIA is like the company for AI, and AI is going to change the world, blah, blah, blah. So, there's two sides to every story. And I just kind of wanted to get you guys' take on it. Do you think that NVIDIA's like market cap is worth it? Is it justified? And if not, are they, potentially the next Cisco, right? Like maybe you can see that, like maybe your argument is that this is a bubble that will burst eventually, and then they'll fall back down and never regain the glory that they're gaining now. Or just what are your opinions on NVIDIA in general?
So like I'll chime in here. So I think my overall opinions on NVIDIA is like, okay, yeah, fundamentally they are like the main chip holder for like AI, and they're like leading in this industry or whatnot. But I think it's at a point where it's extremely expensive. So in no way whatsoever, I mean, of course I've thought about it, but like I think as of right now, I don't think I'm interested in buying on the top necessarily. I think like fundamentally it's like you buy low and then sell high. But like if you buy at the tip, I mean, I think it kind of dropped a little bit today to 130. We're recording this on Thursday, June 20th. So who knows? I mean, tomorrow could drop even more or it could go up. I think it's just a little too unpredictable at this time. And I think there would be like less gain you would get from investing into Nvidia now versus like any other positions or stocks that you can get more out of your money. I mean, I could be wrong too, but I think for the time being, it might be a little too expensive for me to get into. So I think I'll pause for now. But who knows? Tomorrow morning I could change my mind. So we'll see.
Yeah, so from my side, I will say that I wish I hadn't sold my NVIDIA. I would have loved to have ridden this up my a full 7x on from where I had purchased and or sold, because I sold somewhere in the 30-ish range. I think I sold there, and I think I bought the 20-ish range. This is stock split adjusted. So it's like 200 back then when I was buying it. And from my perspective, I would have loved to have participated in this growing bubble, but unfortunately, the bubble is well and truly there, at least from my perspective, which means that investing in NVIDIA right now is extremely risky from my perspective, because from the way I see it, the upside potential, maybe there's some, but again, I don't think that the company is as valuable as its market cap is, right? So maybe there's some upside potential, but again, it wouldn't be upside from a fundamental perspective. It would be upside from the sentiment around the company more so than the company doing something incredibly great that is really good and making lots and lots and lots of money, right? So from that perspective, it makes it really unappealing for me to invest in currently. I do like NVIDIA as a company in terms of like the product and what they create, what their offerings are. I think that is something that is very difficult to their chips are very difficult to reproduce and or substitute for. So they have a lot of utility from the AI perspective. The problem is that I think that they've run up too much too fast, and so at some point, and I'm not sure where exactly that point is, we bypassed the actual value that NVIDIA should be, and we've zoomed into the moon in a fever dream of people buying the stock for more money than they should have, and then more people buying the stock because they keep seeing it running. So from that perspective, I think that it's a big bubble. I think the upside is limited from this point particularly. There may be some upside, but again, I don't think it's worth the risk, because from my perspective, once the buying stops, the company I don't think is able to sustain itself at this level of share price, which means that they will fall back down towards their fundamental value, which from my perspective, since that's much lower, my opportunity for purchasing NVIDIA right now would be I buy it now and then I risk it falling back to its fundamental value, which would be a substantial loss, or I buy it now, hoping that it goes up in more of a bubble, right? So I think that if you're going to take advantage of a scenario where there is a bubble being created, you don't want to be doing it at the top of the bubble. You want to be participating before the bubble. You want to hold during the bubble, and then you want to sell in the peak-ish of the bubble. If you buy NVIDIA right now, you are at the peak-ish of the bubble. You're the bag holder. You're the person that the person who bought down here is selling to, right?
But are we though? Because I felt like the peak was like when it hit like 900, which is like $90 split adjusted, right? So I thought the peak was at 90, and then it just kept on going, right? So are we at the top? I don't know, man.
Who knows? Like again, the market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. So the market can do something. Like, I'm not going to short NVIDIA, that's for sure. But I don't think it's worth this much. I think this is more similar to the Cisco bubble than not. But again, I'm not as familiar with the Cisco bubble, so I'm just tech firm in a bubble. That's basically the main comparison points that I see on those ones. I don't have any more details or thoughts on that. I just don't think it's I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth the risk.
I totally agree with you, actually. So, I if you guys follow me on X or Twitter or whatever it's called, I know somebody's gonna bring it up and be like, "Hey, you defended NVIDIA and you said like it wasn't a bubble back in the day." Well, that was like maybe, I don't know, 5-6 months ago when it was at like $80 or $90 per share. And then it's a different story once like it hit almost 140, or it was at 140 just briefly, right? And I think that the game has changed, right? And I'm inclined to believe that it probably is a bubble at this point. I know, like, I'm gonna probably offend a lot of NVIDIA fans, but it's like, I think you guys know, right? Like, the price that you pay for a company really matters, even if it's a great company. And I think that that's the point that I really want to drill through everybody's head, right? So you can be in a great company and still lose money because you overpaid for it. And I learned this lesson the hard way with a company that we all know and love called PayPal, right? So I thought I was getting a steal when I bought the stock at like, was it like 120, or the 120 was like the lowest price that I bought it before, this wave back in like, I think like 2021 or 2022. And I think it was at like 200 at one point. And I think I bought some once it went below 200, and then like I averaged down again. But like my average cost is like much higher than $100 per share. And the stock is like nowhere near that right now, right? It's like down more than 50% on my cost basis from my original buys that I did back in the day. So, if you look at PayPal, it's a great company, and I would argue that right now the company is at a great value as well. But if you look at like the price that I paid, it's obvious I overpaid, right? So my point is that you can be in a great company but still be a bag holder for years and years if you buy at the wrong price. And I think that that might be what's happening for Nvidia. Is that like a lot of people are getting sucked in and they want to buy it, and it's like, okay, no one's going to stop you from buying it at $140 per share, but keep in mind that you may be a bag holder for years, because like, not that Nvidia is not a great company, it is a great company, but you're just, all that growth has been priced in, right? So there's just no meat left on the bones. Versus if you look at something like a PayPal, I just checked PayPal's forward PE is at like 14, right? For like a breakout like fintech company that's like super well known, maybe not breakout but like established, the opposite of that. So established fintech company, and if you look at the charts, like I think PayPal and Venmo, which is owned by PayPal, they're always like number 2 or number 3 in the app store in America for the most popular finance related apps. So if you look at PayPal, the stock is trading at under $60 per share right now, and it's just a much better value compared to something like a Nvidia, right? So when the stock is going up, everyone loves it and everyone wants to buy more and more, and that, like, for the short term, bumps the price up, like what we've seen with Nvidia, right? The share price just keeps going up. And then if you have something like a PayPal, which was adored back when it was like 300, right? I didn't hear anybody complaining about PayPal getting like out competed or getting destroyed by the competition, or PayPal's an old brand and dying company. I didn't hear any of that back when it was 300. But now that the stock is under $60 per share, everyone's coming out of the woodwork and be like, PayPal's dead, like they have so much competition, and like we all love Nvidia, no one loves PayPal, right? I think that this is just like kind of the emotion of the stock market that is really easy for a beginner to get sucked into. And my advice is try not to get sucked into that hype. So yeah, at the very least, if you disagree that Nvidia is a bubble, I would disagree with you, but I have, like, everyone's entitled to their own opinions. But at the very least, I think we should agree that Nvidia is at least fairly valued, at least, right? Just I don't think anybody can argue against that. But I don't know. Who knows? Maybe like I was wrong about Nvidia when it hit 90. I was like, that was the peak, but it's not. So Dom, let me toss the question to you then. What do you think? Am I correct, or you agree or disagree with anything?
No, I'm more in the sense of like agreeance, like if that's a word. But I think right now, like as it continuously goes up and up and up and up and up, I just find it a lot harder for me to want to get in when like it just goes against like basic investing. It's like, why would you buy high and then eventually have to sell low when you can just like buy low and sell high? I think if you just look at the chart, like even like a toddler can see like, oh, that is like really flipping high. So if you got in at that point, it's like you know heavy risk at that point. I mean, arguably you could probably earn more money, but you're also in risk of losing a lot of it super duper quickly. So if you do plan on going in, it's really something you truly have to think about, and you have to live with your decision whether it goes up or down. And yeah, you have to see it through. You have no choice. But yeah, I do agree with you. I think at this time it's like more of a not buy rather than a buy. So yeah.
Okay, great. Let's move on then, because we are a little bit short on time. So the next story is the average TFSA and RSP and savings balances of Canadians by age. So I put, well, I didn't put this together, but I saw this chart and I stole it from somewhere on Twitter. And this is a breakdown of Canadians by age group and their average amount of balance that's in each type of account. So an RSP, or registered retirement savings plan, in case you guys are like people watching, our audience members who are not Canadian, That's the equivalent of an IRA in the United States, roughly, right? And the TFSA is the equivalent of a Roth IRA. So it's after-tax money that is not taxed on the gains. Bank account is pretty self-explanatory. It's just like regular savings accounts. And then the last column is the sum of the total savings when you add those together. So you can see that the Canadians under 35 are actually doing a little bit better than the Canadians aged 35 to 44, which is somewhat surprising. But maybe it's because, like once you're 35 to 44, you got kids and you got more expenses and stuff like that. So you might make more, but then you also have a lot more spending than people under 35, right? But the average total savings of Canadians under 35 is about 29,000 Canadian dollars, and that goes down to 27,000 Canadian dollars when you're 35 to 44. And then when you make the jump to 45 to 54, that's kind of when it starts to go back up a lot again, and the average is around 55,000. And then when you get to the older crowd, 55 to 64, it really starts to jump up, right? The average is 126K. And then once you get to 65 and older, they have like a lot more money than everyone else at 259K on average, right? So this is kind of like the breakdown of the charts, and then you guys can like look at in each individual field for each individual accounts and age group. I'm not going to go through that line by line, but here is the chart. So my question or today's topic of discussion is, what do you guys think of this chart? Do you think, it's like, do you think Canadians are doing well or doing badly based on their average sum of savings that they have? And yeah, like if we're doing well, why do you think we're doing well? If we're doing badly, why do you think we're doing badly? That's kind of the topic of discussion that I wanted to kind of go down. So I don't know who wants to take this first.
Doing absolutely horribly. Like that's so okay, this is a bit mean. Okay, excuse the French. No, I'm not gonna swear, it's fine. But I think this fundamentally goes behind the fact that our school systems perhaps don't really have financial education systems or like classes in place. So people are more susceptible to like being irresponsible with money. And honestly, I think this is a general result of this. I mean, you can argue that it's inflationary times, things are really expensive. But if you precautionarily did the proper steps and like, you know, found ways to keep money and understand that like, oh, you need to, buy assets so you can grow and grow your money a lot more and keep your liabilities nice and like small, then I don't think that you would have like 27K between the ages of 35 to 44. If I were to be frank with you, I think when you're 35 years old, I think you probably should have at least like $100,000 like worth of net worth, and I think 27K is a bit low, and that just goes from the fact that not everyone's like completely financially like literate, and that's something they need to study up on. And on the caveat, some people are born in specific circumstances or whatnot, but I think general knowledge and like investing into asset classes and lowering liabilities is like a huge part of like building your total net worth. And if you just understand these principles, I think you can have more than 27K in your overall bank account, including, you know, TFSA and RSP. I think it's a bit questionable that Canadians are, at this current state. And yeah, Tristan, you can go ahead.
What I'm gonna say? I'm gonna say that's terrifying, given that this is average. This is average. That means that anyone with a lot of money in their TFSA, RSP, or whatever is going to be throwing the scale and giving money to people who have less money in their, what's it called? So, for example, if you are under the age of 35 and you say have $1 million and there is 10 people who have $0, well, the average is 100K, my guy. Right? So, based on that, I think that factor, because it's average, not median, and even and I believe the median is probably worse. I would be. I feel like these are a very low amount of money to have in your accounts in like for planning for future retirement, as well as just being able to bear unexpected expenses, right? Because again, there will be unexpected expenses that come up that you can't foresee. So having access to money in a TFSA or a bank account to cover some of these expenses. So for example, a car breakdown, a car repair, whatever. Right. So I think that this is I think it's very concerning. I don't think that this is a ton of money, but again, I also think that these numbers are high, which is another scary factor. I think that these numbers are actually higher than they would be for most people. So and again, I think that if we took net worth, for example, I think that like age 65, age 55 to 65, I think that those amounts would be a lot higher from like house ownership, etc., especially in Canada, where you bought a house for $20,000 in 1975, and now it's worth many millions. So I'm not as concerned for the older folks, but I think the big concern is the two middle eras, the under 35. Honestly, the first three are the big concerns, because those are the ones that a 45-year-old may not have a house, so they may not have an asset like that. But the 35 and the younger than 35, a lot of them don't have any assets whatsoever. So the what you see on this chart is the majority of their net worth, right? Or the majority of their savings or their assets. So I think that that's just very concerning. I don't think it speaks to a particularly good situation, particularly for the younger folks. That's was there a specific question also that I was supposed to answer?
No, I was getting to it, but that will be part 2. But let me just maybe speak on what I think of this part. Yeah, I totally agree with you guys. I'm actually concerned about all the age groups, right? So like Tristan said, this is average, not median, right? So if you look at median, it'll probably be a lot worse. And yeah, sure, like the younger demographics have lower savings, which is not great. But the older people who have more savings, you might think that that's great. But I know a lot of older people that don't have 100K or 200K like sitting in their bank account or sitting in their investment account either, right? And for those people, it's a lot more concerning, because they don't have the ability to like learn new skills and go get a new job if they don't have money, right? So like even like 55 is still relatively young, maybe, so maybe you can still like get a new job by then. But if you're like in the 60s kind of range, 64, 65, like you're supposed to be retired by that point, right? And if you're forced to go get a new job because you don't have money anymore and you don't have enough saved for retirement, like you're just gonna have a bad time. There's like no way around it. So companies, especially like these startup tech companies, are probably not gonna hire like a 65-year-old unless you have some like special skill that no one else has, right? So a lot of these older folks, end up going to minimum wage jobs, like they go to Walmart, they go to Home Depot and places like that, right? And those jobs don't pay a lot. So yeah, I just think that this is a huge issue. And to answer Tristan's question, is there a second part to this story? So you guys know that I'm gonna bring this up, right? And I know that this again is gonna sound super like biased and whatnot, but my question is, how much of this is Trudeau's fault, right? I always ask this question every single episode, and I know like you can hear the pushback already. It's like, oh, you just have an anti-liberal bias, you're just like a shill for Pierre. It's like, number one, okay, maybe it's true. I do have a anti-liberal bias, but I'm not a shill for Pierre. I'm not a shill for anybody. I'm not getting paid to like promote anything or promote political like propaganda. Like these are just my kind of honest stream of consciousness kind of thoughts, right? And the reason, and again, if Pierre was in charge or if a conservative government was in charge, I'd be picking on them too for these results, right? Like if you mess up this badly, then prepare to answer to the everyday Canadian, to voters, right? To constituents who are upset about the way that the economy is going. So I think, you know, I'm picking on Trudeau because he's the prime minister right now, and he's been the prime minister for 10 years. And this is the state that our economy is in, right? And last week we showed a chart where the GDP per capita of Canada, right, ever since Trudeau got into power, if you look at the like GDP per capita compared to the United States, it was in lockstep before Trudeau came into power. And as soon as he came in power, Canada fell off and the United States kept on going, right? So my point was that of that episode, of that story, was that economic policy matters. And I think that this is just another instance of where you can see how much exactly does leadership in our government matters for economics, for economic policy, and how that affects everyday Canadians in general. So my question to you is, again, how much of this is Trudeau's fault? And do you think that, you know, this is mismanagement on Trudeau's part or just on the government's part in general?
So I think that you do tend to get a little bit direct with Trudeau on the blame side, because like on this one, I don't know the exact stats for the past, but from what I recall from looking at stats in the past, this kind of breakdown where basically everyone has no money has been a kind of ongoing theme throughout you know, at least my remembered looking into this sort of stuff. You know, again, I haven't been looking into this for that long, but I feel like I have recollections of seeing stats such as this and being like, that doesn't seem like a lot of money, you know, 5-10 years ago, right? And
Well,
so
Trudeau's been in charge for 10 years, man. He's been in there for the whole
he was, yeah, but if we go back 10 years ago, he just got in charge. It's not his fault, you know, what, you know, we aren't going to blame Pierre when he gets in for this on the day he gets in or the year he gets in, right? So I don't think that this is necessarily entirely his fault. I think that there's a couple things that I think are his fault. I think that not encouraging, or at least to my knowledge, not encouraging financial education in schools is something that I think Trudeau could have had some aspect of. I understand that that is provincial, but there could be efforts made to make that a priority for the provincial folks, right? So that, as Dom was kind of alluding to, people understand what they need to do to have a good future, right? So that people can prepare for the future by like planning, buying, investing assets and stocks, etc. So that's not this like scary unknown, right? And so from that perspective, I think that there's stuff that he could do. And then in addition, I think that one aspect that we're not seeing here is the inflation aspect, right? So that dollar amount can buy less stuff than that dollar amount if it was the same dollar amount 10 years ago, right? And Trudeau did have a large role in the additional inflation. Again, you can make the argument that some of it was unavoidable because of the pandemic, and that the pandemic was difficult to manage for basically every political leader. But again, you know, I'm just saying his decisions in that instance directly contributed to the purchasing power of this money that is people have saved being less valuable. And honestly, if your money is becoming less valuable, you are inclined to spend it as soon as possible, right? And I think that is another indirect aspect of the inflation. Whereas if I know that it's going to cost more to buy canned goods next time I go shopping, I'll buy canned goods today, right? Or more canned goods, right? So, and then I'll have less money to buy assets, right? Or honestly, just having my accounts for this metric. So I think that he has some role. I think that, is it fair to really blame him for the majority of this situation? It gets difficult because it's a lot of what he's done has been very indirect. It's not directly contributing to this fact, but there's been a lot of things that have been indirectly contributing to this fact. Another one is like housing, for example, the cost of housing going up, right? He's contributed indirectly to the cost of housing going up. So that's another area where if I'm paying more for housing, I have less money in my savings accounts. So again, he's had a lot of indirect contributions to this situation. How many direct ones, and if it's really like his fault, I think it's difficult to judge, at least for me, because I don't think that. Sorry, I just want to say I just don't think that a different government would have necessarily prevented this exact scenario from happening. That's kind of where I'm getting at. So unless you're blaming all political parties for their failures to resolve this issue, I think that it's difficult to say that Trudeau did this more than others have in the past.
What I have to say to that is the same thing that I said last episode, which is leadership matters and economic policies matter. Again, this is like the example that I brought up last time was Microsoft stock, right? So if you look at the chart of Microsoft stock price under Bill Gates' leadership, and then transition on to Steve Ballmer, and then transition on to Satya Nadella, you can tell that Bill Gates brought the company from basically nothing to like a sky high valuation, right? And then he left. He gave the company to Steve Ballmer, and then under Steve Ballmer, the stock went nowhere for 10 years. And then Satya Nadella took over, and then the stock price pretty much almost immediately. It wasn't like exactly immediate, of course, right? But after Nadella took over, the stock price went up, and now it's the second most valuable company in the world, bested only by the aforementioned NVDA, which was a recent thing that just happened like a week ago or a couple days ago, not even a week ago. So yeah, I just think that, again, leadership matters. And I'm not trying to single out Trudeau as much as it sounds like I am. I'm singling out the current administration, right? The current incumbent people that are in charge, that I think, again, there's an argument as to how direct their effect is. And I'm not trying to argue that Trudeau is the cause of every single financial woe that Canada has gone through, right? Obviously, a lot of that was not under his control, just like how everything, like the CEO of a company doesn't control everything that happens in his company, right? But again, leadership matters. And I think that the leadership on the economic front has been super, super subpar ever since Trudeau came into power. So, yeah, Dom, you haven't spoken in a while. Let me pass it to you. What do you think? Do you blame Trudeau for this, or do you think that this is a complicated issue, and are you going to defend him?
Okay, so here's my thoughts on that overall. To give him like the benefit of the doubt, like, we're under like really unique circumstances in this specific decade, the beginning of the pandemic. And, of course there's like probably no choice but to have to print money because no one is like able to work, right? So government has to give money to like citizens in order to like survive and stuff like this. And because of that, when everyone was able to start work again, or when everyone had the opportunity to be able to work again, because people were spending money, and then interest rates were so low that things were getting a little out of hand. So, federal governments needed to raise interest rates again, and that whole shenanigan area thing couldn't really be avoided. So that's why we're in like our situation that we are now. But on the flip side, I think maybe in terms of like the leadership aspect and stuff like that, um, maybe Trudeau's economic policies, I don't know what they are completely. I'm not knowledgeable in that, but I think from my points or my points of view, it may not be like beneficial for Canada, like housing and etc. Like um, related but not related, like immigration policies, like that is not like a pro to Canada too as well. It could be, but maybe not right now. Like these small like micro decisions have like a certain effect on Canada, and therefore the GDP is like kind of affected by that. But at the same time, there's so many natural effects that are like pretty uncontrollable. So I can't say it's completely his fault, but you can argue that it's partially maybe his fault just because of the way everything is now. And then he is the leader after all. I guess I agree with Andy, and he could have done maybe some things differently. But I'll say like it probably isn't fully his fault because of all these natural occurrences, but maybe partially.
I mean, it sounds like you guys still need some convincing. So let's move on to the next story. And hopefully, maybe you'll agree with my point of view a little bit more after this next story. All right. So I feel like maybe it sounds like I've presented a lot of arguments without data and evidence backing it up. And if you get that feeling, I'm sorry. But that will all change because I am going to show you some arguments that are backed by data that are not coming from me, but they're actually coming from the Shopify executive team. So I don't know if I think everybody knows what Shopify is, right? I don't have to explain. They're at one point the largest company in Canada. I think that they've dropped back down a bit because their last earnings report wasn't great. But they're still like top five biggest company in Canada for sure. They're still in the top five. And Toby Lutke, he is the CEO of Shopify, and he posted this. He posted this chart and he says, we have to reverse this, Canada, ideally all of it. And what is this, right? So this is a chart of the percentage change of public versus private sector jobs versus self-employed jobs since 2014. So, the y-axis is the percentage change since 2014. And then, the past 10 years, basically, right? So public sector is government jobs, right? Private sector is just everything else. And then self-employed is, you guys get the point, right? Self-employed is self-employed. So you guys can see that before the pandemic, everything kind of just went up in lockstep. But then after the pandemic, what we've seen is that the amount of public sector employees has exploded, right? It's gone up way more than everything else. So private sector, yes, it's gone up, but not nearly as much as the public sector, which has increased by more than 25%. And then the amount of self-employment is basically stagnating. It's at near 0%, or sometimes even negative, or mostly negative, actually. So the amount of self-employed, like entrepreneurs, have not been increasing, while the amount of public employees have been exploding. So maybe this is like a reason why Canadians are so upset these days, because all the jobs reports are coming out being like Canada added like way more jobs than we expected. But if we're adding so much jobs and unemployment is so low, why aren't people happy, right? And I think this chart goes to show why people aren't happy is because the public sector, right, like who survives on taxpayer dollars, has exploded. And in order to fund this ever increasing like bureaucracy, the government is kind of forced to tax people more, because otherwise, how are they going to afford to pay all these public sector employees, right? Versus like businesses, especially self-employed people who run their own businesses. Well, no one's opening a new business anymore. No one's deciding to go down that pathway, right? So that's one sector. And I think that's why like Shopify CEO Toby was kind of upset looking at this, right? And then the last chart, or not really a chart, but just a tweet from Harley Finkelstein, who's the president of Shopify. He says, I truly love Canada and I am fiercely Canadian. This country will always be my home, and I try my best to spread Canadian pride all over the world. But this isn't the way to unite us and move us forward. This is divisive and political, and we're better than this. And he's reacting to a tweet by Justin Trudeau, who is saying, we're asking the wealthiest Canadians to profit a little bit less and pay off and use their capital gains to reinvest in Canada and the middle class and pay their fair share. So obviously this rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, because as we previously discussed on this channel, there's all these like problems with the capital gains tax proposal where they're taxing, like, yes, they are going to tax the wealthiest Canadians, but they're also taxing small businesses, right? And a lot of doctors in Canada run as small businesses and they don't get an exemption. So this might make the doctor shortage worse. We have a huge doctor shortage. Almost a third of Canadians can't find a family doctor. So a lot of experts are saying this is going to make that worse. And there's just all sort of like knock-on effects from just raising the capital gains tax, right? You think like, oh, we're going to stick it to the wealthy and make them pay more. Well, it's like the wealthy also spend a lot of money, right? And if they're not going to spend as much because you're taxing them more, well, then what kind of knock-on effects will that have in the general economy, right? So that's just kind of like, the Shopify executives are kind of, maybe I would say, agreeing with me when I'm sounding the alarm bells on the Canadian economy. And I really think that Trudeau's kind of taking us in the wrong direction. And here's the kind of data to back it up, right? So wanted to get you guys' thoughts. What do you guys think of this chart on the public versus private versus self-employed employments? And then how do you react to what Harley Finkelstein had to say against Justin Trudeau's proposed capital gains tax raise? So lots to talk about. Take it away.
Yeah, so with regards to the first point about the public versus private sector gains, I do think that is a bit concerning, because we do need the private sector to be healthy in order for our country's economy to be pretty healthy, right? And I understand that they are growing at a faster rate, but the amount that the public sector is going up in terms of percentage, and to be clear, I understand that the graph that we are reviewing is by percentage. So it could be that it's likely that there are less public sector jobs than there are private sector jobs. It's just that there are more proportionally of public sector than private sector being created, even if there's maybe not more numerically. And I do think that it seems like there's a lot more public sector jobs being created. And I'm not sure exactly what the value proposition for all of these public sector jobs is. And I think that's one thing that maybe if there was more coverage on to understand what these are, because I believe teachers, for example, would be potentially considered public sectors, right, if they work for a public school board, right? So if it's more teachers, maybe that's a good thing. But if it's more, I don't know, I don't really know what a lot of the public sector employees do. So it's difficult to come up with another alternative.
Well, but that's the point, right? Like that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make, is that I don't think they're adding more teachers, because like the teachers unions are talking about going on strike like every other month these days, because like they're understaffed and they're not getting paid enough. So clearly, like if you ask any teacher, I don't think that they'll tell you that they've added a lot of teachers. If anything, I think most teachers will tell you the exact opposite, that they're understaffed and like they're not getting enough resources. So if they're spending all this money on the public sector and it's not going into education, at least it doesn't seem like it, like what is it going to, right? And like you just said, like I don't know what's it going into, right? It's clearly, I think, in my opinion, it's going into a lot of these like bureaucratic positions where it's like, oh, here's like a manager of diversity, or it's like here's a manager of like Canadian media content, or we talked about a lot about the like Canadian regulatory bills on Canadian content and media and stuff like that, right? So all of that is expansive, right? Like it increases the amount of need for like these, you know, regulators to determine what is Canadian, what is not, right? So I do believe that a lot of these jobs are added in sectors like these. Again, I could be wrong. I'm just speculating. This is one thing that I don't have the data to back it up. But, you know, my point is that it appears that we're spending a lot of taxpayer dollars on adding new public sector jobs, and we're just not seeing the benefit of it. And that's kind of the crux of the problem. But yeah, let me toss it back to you, Tristan.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That was kind of also where I was going as well with because another area that I would think is public sector is like doctors, etc. A lot of them, if you work for like a public hospital, that would be my expectation. It would be that would be considered in the public sector, but we clearly have a doctor shortage. So it's presumably not teachers and not doctors, and so I'm running out of areas where the public sector could see some growth that desperately needs growth. And so I'm not really sure what the value add from us paying for these additional public sector employees is. And that's not to say that I don't think that they could be doing great work for whatever they're doing. It's just that I don't know what the heck they're doing. And, you know, maybe if I knew what they were doing, I would think it's valuable. But again, it's just a little concerning that it's increasing at such a rate so much faster than the private sector, because that does imply that there is more like bureaucracy, etc., as Andy's kind of alluding to, being created that that's not providing value but is costing taxpayer dollars, which then, you know, everyone pays for. So it's, you know, it's a difficult thing to balance. And I think that another big factor is the fact that the self-employed seems to have basically fallen off the ladder completely, right? With basically seemingly very few people transitioning to it, or a lot of people transitioning from it. And that's also concerning, because I think in order for us to have a strong, healthy economy, we need innovation, and we need, you know, the next Shopify to be a company in Canada rather than in the United States, for instance. So it could be alluding to the fact that maybe there's a brain drain. And again, this would likely be a variable problem that we're seeing with that. But it's clear that people are not as comfortable either taking the risks that it takes to become self-employed, or they're not comfortable with you know, the additional cost. They're not comfortable with whatever it is, maybe the regulatory environment. Again, it's difficult to say why exactly the self-employed has reduced, but I think that there's a lot of things that appear to be something that if I were choosing about whether or not I wanted to risk becoming self-employed for something, to proceed with some startup or something idea, I think that there are a lot of things that would make me uncomfortable doing so currently.
Did you just said multi-burial back there? I think
variable.
I think that phrase like perfectly sums up the experience in Canada. It's the multi-burial of like of self-employed jobs, right? Like look at the amount of self-employed jobs. It's just like crashing like a rock. And you know, it's just, I think again, leadership matters, right? Sorry I cut you off, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think it is concerning, and I think that it speaks to our current environment, the fact that the self-employed is so low. I think it speaks to an economy that is not in a position where people are able or willing to take risks, and that's not good for the economy and by and large. And I think that public sector.
To that, I have to say, like, you know, the second point from Finkelstein summed it up completely, right? It's like Trudeau's asking the wealthy to pay their fair share. And it's like, where's that money coming from, right? It's coming from businesses, and a lot of these self-employed people have capital gains. So it's like you're asking those people, and it's like if the government is going to just continuously raise taxes on you, then that disincentivizes you to do business, right? And this is, I don't get what's so hard for the government to understand, but it appears that we're making one mistake after the other. But Dom, you haven't spoken in a while. Why don't I toss the question to you? What do you think of these two pieces of statistics?
Oh, I think it's like quite nuts. Like there's obviously like a huge difference going into 2020, and I think you guys have like a good point. It sounds like there's more going into public sectors, but I mean, do we honestly like truly know where that's going? So it's a bit of a mystery. And I also do agree on the fact that I think more investment into innovations like probably good for the economy. Like I think we're the biggest companies in the S&P 500, like Apple, Microsoft, NVDA. Like these are all innovative companies that like have heavily driven the economy in America and like the overall like GDP. And I think that's kind of what Canada needs too as well in order to like, ascend to the next level and like have people struggle a lot less than, how they're struggling right now. And then in terms of the self-employment line, I think it's a bit crazy. It's like, I think in this economy and life right now, there isn't really much of a chance for entrepreneurs to really become entrepreneurs or even like engage in any partnerships like self-employed. I think it's like um far too expensive to do anything, and interest rates are like pretty much all-time highs minus like the recent cuts. So it's not really a platform for people self-employed to start becoming self-employed. So I think there definitely has to be some sort of change that needs to happen in order to be able to fix all this. So we can go back to that uh, pre 2020 equilibrium line look thing on the chart there. We'll have that on the screen, I guess. But yeah, you get my idea.
I mean, I would argue that even that is like, you can see that even before 2020, it was kind of like public sectors were still increasing slightly more in percentage terms compared to the private sector and self-employment, which I think is still a bit of a problem, but it's nowhere near as pronounced as what it is now. But even like then, I would argue that like we should target small government, right? And we should try to make the government as efficient as we can. And sometimes that does require you to expand the size of the government. But I think like the Trudeau administration has just taken this and like ran with it and like injected steroids into this idea. It's like, yeah, like we gotta like just massively expand the government and do all these programs. And to what Dom's point was saying earlier, how you were saying we should invest in like tech and stuff. Like I generally agree, but I actually don't think that the government should get directly involved in these like tech matters, right? You've seen how poorly that this government has done with investing in the ArriveCan app, where they paid like millions and millions of dollars to this like one guy who's just like coding in his basement or whatever, and the app didn't even like work that well. So and then now they're spending like $2 billion in this new budget to invest in AI, and it's just like, why does the government need to get directly involved in AI? Why can't they just pick some of the most like innovative companies in Canada, let's say, right? Like pick 5 of the most outstanding companies in Canada and give them all tax breaks and just be like, hey, like for the next 5 years, contingent on like, some metric, right? How much revenue you can generate or how much like things you can invent. I don't know if there's like an accurate way to measure that, but like contingent on these metrics, you get 0% capital gains or income or corporate tax or whatever, right? Just like give all these tax incentives that are not like directly coming out of the pocket of the taxpayer if they don't perform, right? So if they don't perform, then you don't give them anything, or they do perform, then you just not charge them taxes on like taxes that they would have otherwise paid or something like that, right? So it doesn't cost you any cash up front, and you can still incentivize innovation. And I think this is what maybe like the Shopify executives are truly getting at, was that, they don't want, it's not like, they just want people. Of course they want more money as business owners, right? But it's not like I think they're really trying to think of it in terms of what's the best for the country as a whole, not just for Shopify. Because if the country, Shopify is based in Canada, so if the country succeeds, then I think that Shopify will succeed as well, right? So the goals are actually aligned in this case. And I think that these executives, Toby and Harley, they're right. They're just expressing some frustration, justifiably, in my opinion. So anyways, that's it for me. Tristan, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to jump in on what Harley was kind of suggesting, because I don't think I touched on it very much. And I think that the what he's really suggesting, maybe not suggesting, but what kind of the capital gains increase could incentivize is for a lot of these people who would be more of the risk taker entrepreneur types to just leave the country and go to the US, which is not that far, not that difficult to get in, especially if you're someone who is innovative and got a lot to offer the country. And so I think that Trudeau's kind of perspective on it is very much like we'll get more tax revenue, but he's kind of missing the perspective of this is Canada is not in a bubble. It's right beside the largest country, the largest economy, and a place that will delightfully gobble up all of our talent if we let them. And by raising the capital gains tax, you're not going to have anything to reinvest in the middle class if all the innovators leave. The next Shopify creator heads to the States. And so I think that's kind of what I just wanted to touch on for that kind of thing, and you can kind of see it again with that self-employed, like a lot of people I suspect are leaving the country and heading to greener pastures. So that's kind of what I wanted to round up on that front.
Yeah, and actually that brings up one last point that I wanted to make that you just reminded me of, and it's that last sentence that Harley said, where this is divisive, right? And I think that that's kind of the point that I also wanted to hit on, that I agree with Harley, where I do think that this is incredibly divisive, what Trudeau said, right? So, his kind of Trudeau's perspective, I feel like on this issue is kind of like he's pitting the rich versus the poor, right? So it's like, if you're the rich, then you're kind of not paying your fair share right now, right? Because he's implying that he's raising the tax so that the rich can pay their fair share. So it's like, you're not paying your fair share. You're kind of freeloading on the entire country. And then you're like doing this and that, and you're like, hoarding all the wealth, blah, 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 right? And it kind of like, maybe it riles up some of his supporters, right? Who might be like, let's just face it, lower income people tend to vote for the left-leaning parties, right? So it might rile up some of his followers and be like, yeah, like screw those rich people, like we're gonna take their money. But I've said this like over and over again on this show, and this is also another point that I wanted to drill into everybody's heads. It's like, I really don't think it's helpful to be fighting over the scraps of the pie, right? So my goal has always been to find ways and solutions to increase the size of the pie for everyone. And sometimes when you fight over the scraps of the pie, you pit neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend, fellow Canadian against fellow Canadian. That just makes everything worse, because as Tristan said earlier, you blame the rich for all your problems, right? The rich is not paying their fair share. They're hoarding their wealth. They're kind of stepping on the toes of the little guys, and they're getting fat. Well, like everyone is starving. So that's why we got to commandeer their wealth and redistribute it to everyone. Well, the rich is not going to want to live in a place where, the people want to like eat them, right? Like eat the rich. That's like one of the slogans of the left, right? Eat the rich. Like the rich is not going to want to live in a place where somebody could just like rise up and take their wealth. So the rich, being the rich, they're going to want to leave, right? And it's not always the people that, the rich, like snobby people eating caviar that you need to worry about. Some people are rich because they worked hard for it, right? They built their own businesses, and they went through the hardship and went through all the complicated process of, like, finding a market product fit and all that stuff. And then you're just driving all these people away, right? So I think that this is indeed divisive, what Trudeau said, and this is not what we need to be doing right now. We don't need to be fighting over the scraps of the pie. We need to find ways to make the pie bigger for everyone. And when you encourage business, when you encourage innovation, when you encourage investment into the company instead of capital outflow, that's how you increase the size of the pie for everyone. And what Trudeau is doing is the exact opposite of that. And that's why I'm so frustrated at this current administration. And yeah, that's why I can't wait for the next election so that we can vote out this government. So yeah, that's all I have to say. I know that was kind of a long-winded, semi sort of rant. But Dom, do you have anything else you wanted to add to this story? No, you're good. Okay, great. So I will pass it off to you anyways for the outro then.
Alrighty, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed today's podcast for today. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe to this channel, as well as the Clip channel too, and our personal channels. And with that being said, bye, guys. Peace.
Have a good one.
Thanks for watching. See you next time.